Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just start briefly by introducing my colleagues that are here with me in this panel. Um, we have His Grace Archbishop Anthony Muheria, who's the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of Nyeri and the Apostolic Administrator of Kitui and Machakos dioceses. I'm going to give Archbishop an opportunity to explain what all these titles mean so that we can relate it to the business world. Because sometimes the titles within the faith-based organizations can be very overwhelming. But suffice it to say that he has a significant mandate. And in the past, Archbishop Muheria has actually been the head of the finance committee of the Kenyan Catholic Church, which happens to be the third largest landowner in the Republic of Kenya. Technically, if it was a company, it would be a Fortune 500 company. With us as well is Luke Ombati, who's the managing director of Cube, which is Questworks Building Economics. It was a spin-off, a firm derived out of Questworks, a design services firm that is located in Kenya. Questworks has pioneered in several things, including some of the green buildings that we see in Kenya today. But he does bring with him a body of knowledge with respect to not just quantity surveying, but also project efficiency and managing to deliver projects on time and within budget in terms of procurement and all that stuff. So I'll just be quick on this. What I'll do is I'll do a quick presentation on alternative funding and partnerships. I'll touch a bit on faith-based organizations, and then maybe we just go straight into the questions and anything else that you might want to ask. I'll have a bit of a Q&A with the panel, and then from there I'll open it up to the floor for discussion. Okay, thank you. So I work for a Brazilian asset manager called Renovatio Capital, who have investments in the Americas and Asia. Basically, what we do is structured finance and equity, private equity, and debt finance. Our assets under management as Renovatio as a company is about $3.5 billion. We are sector agnostic and we look at project IRRs above 25%. We typically follow the footprint of the promoter. Over the past 3 or so years, we've taken an interest in Africa, and we're looking at an investment strategy to explore the African continent. At the bottom, there is some of the projects that we've been involved with: HG Hotels and Resorts, Lares, and Regis Betancourt. Most of these are Latin America projects. Okay, so where I'm starting from in terms of the project components, I just want to build a base so that we're starting from the same pages. The project components, as we see it, is 1, capital. 2, expertise. You need a team that can deliver the projects. 3, you have insight. There's nothing more valuable than having market intelligence in a specific jurisdiction. Having had the conversations and listened to the different speakers across today, you'll agree with me that you need to have a body of knowledge that is relevant to a specific country that you operate in. Because there's no cookie cutter solution as you go across the 54 African countries. And then finally, the land asset. We are in a property summit. We're discussing land, a very, very valuable, immovable property, which is why choosing your partners wisely is a very important decision to make. These all are tied together by 2 components. One is time, which speaks to when and how the capital is deployed, and that informs what your capital requirements would be. And finally, legislation. It's important to know how to deal with specific legislative requirements of different countries. For example, you may want to structure your investment out through Mauritius if you're putting money into a country like Kenya, but in Tanzania's case, that might not necessarily be the best thing to do. And the reason being that maybe Kenya may have certain double taxation agreements with specific jurisdictions, and you may benefit on the upside, but perhaps for Tanzania, that's not necessary because they may not have that arrangement with other countries. So the typical financing models as we see them, that's fairly common in up continent, by which I mean north of South Africa. You have a lot of people who just do these things out of their own pocket. They don't want anybody else, they just take it upon themselves, they save up money or they've done very well or for whatever reason, and they basically just implement the project themselves. Others decide to get a return on equity and borrow from financial institutions. Notice the choice of wording, not bank, financial institutions. Because particularly up continent, there are different sorts of financial institutions where people borrow money from. There's the traditional banks, as we know them, and then you have savings and credit cooperative societies that are fairly common up continent. And those, you'll realize that sometimes you may look at a country like Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and think it's not very well banked, but the reason is a lot of the people are sourcing their capital from a different financial institution. Then you have self and equity, where you get an equity partner to assist with the funding. And then finally, there's the self-equity and debt, where you get a partner and then you also borrow from a financial institution. And that's the fairly common way of doing these things. Okay, so there are other options. We don't typically discuss often. I mean, you have the bond option. You have fixed income securities, which is what it is. So you have a time and a rate. It's bound by a time and rate. Essentially, this is an IOU. That's what this is. Yeah. You have debentures, which is loan certificate that is secured by the, I'm talking about now the British definition and not the American definition of a debenture, where it's secured by the credit worthiness of the issuer of the debenture. Basically a certificate. He promises you all the best things in the world. It doesn't always pan out that way, but hey. Then you have private debt, which is very common from the larger debt providers, the sovereign wealth funds, and some of the larger pension funds in the world. And typically, these target social impact. So if you have a healthcare concern, if you have a housing concern, affordable housing specifically, you'll generally tend to get audience with this kind of investor. Yeah, so basically, they'll give you the money at a low interest because their money is anyway coming in maybe from a government. There's probably no interest on it. And they're looking to just have, they don't want to park their capital in a bank. They would rather deploy it in a way that it doesn't depreciate in value. Okay. But this is the thing about debt, though. It often feels like this is what they're doing to you. You're actually being policed. You have a noose around your neck. And this is more common up continent, where people are completely credit averse. And they would rather even borrow from their friends and neighbors before they ever took a debt option. Well, what's the need? I mean, when you look at Africa as a continent, you have an overwhelming need in Africa for top structure, as we know, buildings, and infrastructure. It was alluded to in several other fora here, where a country like Mozambique might have a need for healthcare, but there's really no road infrastructure to be able to to support that healthcare response. So you have an entity like perhaps the United Nations that has put up healthcare, but the roads are impassable, and it renders that particular service offering ineffective. You have a significant population. As of 2016, you're talking about 1.25 billion people in the continent. These people, there's an aversion, as I say, to traditional debt, and then you have unexplored funding structures that this continent has not seen. So you need innovation in your financing. The opportunity for transformation, the innovation is inevitable. You have to respond to the market that you're working in. You're not going to employ the same strategy and expect a different result in this continent. So there's a funding gap for sure that needs to be rectified. And the other real opportunity, particularly as far as property investment is concerned, is you need to create healthy urban environments. Now, previously, up continent, people have, there's been what you call urban sprawl, where somebody gets maybe 1,000 square meters stand or smaller and puts up his own entity, completely oblivious of what the surrounding entity, the surrounding environment is. I think some of the regulatory authorities have not really helped in that regard. And so that's not the case in a country like South Africa, where you'd have like a sector plan, and you then zone that, normally to be from agricultural to maybe commercial or mixed use, and then you lay that out, you get that approved, and immediately then you follow that with the ancillary facilities that are then laid down in preparation for whatever top structure you're going to employ there. And then you have now African governments being more supportive of some of these bespoke solutions. You have, for example, in Kenya, there's the capital markets is beginning to open up to derivatives and those kinds of solutions to some of these funding opportunities. So there's an opportunity there for partnership with government and subsidization of some of the cost centers, and I'll explain that in a bit. Then obviously there's overwhelming demand. So you have an opportunity there for project pipeline. I must say, whoever cracks the formula for housing and healthcare, affordable, will probably be the next billionaire in this continent. So financing challenges that we have, for borrowers, it's limited access to long-term funding, and there's difficulty in accessing land and property rights, as well as lack of adequate financial knowledge. So there's a need to sort of educate the market on that. For developers, appropriate long-term funding and a lack of public finances. Sometimes I think government has proven to be a challenge in terms of sourcing some of this capital. And then also for lenders, what they contemplate as high credit risks in this market compared to maybe the developing markets. Difficult in registering liens and high cost of foreclosures. It's very difficult sometimes to actually recover your money. And then obviously there's certain regulatory obstacles that you encounter that possibly limit the space within which they can operate and the dynamism of their products. Okay, so if you look at some of the recent forms of financing, we are fairly familiar with these REITs. We've been discussing REITs in this fora for several summits. You have land-based financing, where you have government entities then participating, or even landowners participating and basically using the land as collateral to raise money. Then you have what we call government offsets, where some of the components of your project, if they are social impact components, be it for maybe healthcare and those sorts of opportunities, there's an opportunity for the government to zero rate some of those components and thereby bring down the cost of your project. Okay, so this is the typical financing structure that we see, which we all familiar with, where you have a development partnership between a landowner and an equity investor. Sometimes on the other side, you may have the developer taking an equity position to sort of bring the cost of the thing down, and sometimes you may even involve other equity partners. Then you get into a project special purpose vehicle, and then it runs boilerplate from there with debt financing from the banks. This is the missing link in Africa. You need an intermediary that will be able to just stand the gap between the end users and the financiers. The intermediary role is to package opportunities for the buyers, so land assembly and functional schemes. Package the project for the financier. In terms of development management and project delivery, implementation risk is typically the heaviest risk that you'll carry. And so now if you look at some of the possible intermediaries, you could look at municipalities that sit on large land banks, and they have a level of fiscal control, particularly in countries where the government has been devolved. The state-owned corporations, they have similar advantages also on strategic land reserves, and then some of them have comparative advantages in terms of financing and the offers that they're able to get. And they can also assist you in guided land development. And then finally, you have developers that have delivery capacity, and unlike the other two, they are unencumbered by red tape. And then finally, large landowners. Collateral is key in this particular instance. Okay, so I'll just cite quickly what I found to be a very unique experience in Latin America. The case of Patrimonio Hoy. The intermediary in this case was Cementex, one of the largest cement manufacturers in the world. Their net sales is $15 billion. So they had a competitive advantage in sourcing building materials and delivering projects. And they had economies of scale. So they were able to deliver 350,000 low-income homes. And believe it or not, that loan repayment rate there was actually 99.2%. And you might ask yourself how. And this is the approach that they adopted. They apply the members apply in groups of 3. That is also to just keep people accountable. It's very difficult to start chasing after low-income people individually and try and attempt to get your money back or to follow up people on repayments. But when you have them as a group, they tend to keep each other accountable. And it makes it easier because then one person would pull down everybody if they do not deliver on their obligations. So they're responsible for the 70-week payments, which are held as payments towards the materials. And what that buys them is a package of the building material and the designs, architectural and engineering services. And then the price of materials is held fixed over the course of work to avoid the fluctuations, which, as we know, can negatively impact your projects. I just went for like the most extreme example to show you that it's actually possible to look at these things very differently and get some results out of it. So there's different options, as I said. There's real estate receivable certificates. And what this might speak to is an approach where you eventually, what I've discovered over the past maybe 5 or so years of doing deal origination on the African continent is most of the landowners eventually want to retain and own the asset at the end of the whole exercise. You don't find too many people that want to develop and sell and get out. There are people who are attached to their land. If you go up continent, you find a lot of that. You find some that actually can't exit from their land. So you then have to come up with a solution that allows them to eventually take back ownership of that asset. So what we typically then do is you'd have the first project starting with the promoter's land holdings. They typically tend to have land and other revenues. In most cases, it's agricultural revenue. So what you can then do is you can set up a vehicle where you can securitize that revenue in structured liquidity, and you have them push that back in together with the land asset. And then you move on to the next project or the next phase. And what, in my experience, is by the third phase, you tend to be able to basically not require any more equity, and you can carry this project on by yourself as a landowner or project promoter. So a sample, this is what we did in as Renovatio Capital. Never mind the Portuguese, but I'll just quickly explain this. We had Habitat Sec, who had a AAA credit rating, so they were acting as, they're basically taking the role of Cementex. And they acted as intermediary, and because of their credit rating, they were able to then get approval from the regulator to sort of set up a securitization structure, which then allowed some of the other entities to issue the credit certificates to the entity. And so for that, the purpose for those certificates was basically to develop affordable housing. And then it was registered in a forum we call CETIP, CETIP. And basically, they were able to then have some form of listing entity which allows them to raise capital consistently for some of these interventions. Now, I'll touch quickly on faith-based organizations. We know them. You have the Christian organizations, you have the Muslim organizations, and you have the Hindu organizations. They have significant land holdings across the continent. I would say across the world, actually. After government and state-owned entities, they are pretty much third in most places in most of the developing world. They have tremendous clout, and they tend to have a principled approach to business, and more often than not, that is where they start with you, which speaks to that being a very important aspect to them in terms of who they're willing to engage. So they tend to take a lot longer doing the due diligence on who their counterparties are, and they're more sensitive to where the source of capital is. They have regular income, as you know, it's offertory and those manner of things, but some of them over time, over the years, have developed different sources of income. Important to state that for these entities, the income is plowed back into the functions of the faith-based organization. You'll find most of the time across the faith-based organizations, they tend to have special bias to healthcare and education, because those are the ones that have direct impact on society. And then the one thing that is very important for faith-based organizations is what we call perpetuity of title. In other words, they can't sell the land to you and cede the land to you because they hold the land in trust. So what does that mean? It means that the only structure that would suitably work with these organizations is a concession structure, in which case they are in a position to give you a long-term lease, upon which then the asset reverts back to them. So some of the people that do this are the Catholic Church, and then you also have, you're probably familiar with the Gherkin Development Network. They have tourist promotion services and a couple of other Gherkin entities. Yes, and that for me is, that's it. As I said, I was trying to rush through that because it's late in the day, but hopefully that has been informative to form a base. So now I'll just go straight into a quick Q&A session with my colleagues, Archbishop Muheria and Luke of Questworks, of Cube. I think I'll just begin with you, Your Grace. Tell us about the way the Catholic Church is structured as an organization, because it's important for people to sort of draw a parallel so that they understand how they can engage with the church. Most people may not have insight as to how the church works, what legal entities are there, and who they can contract with and engage with. So if you can grant us some insight on that.
Thank you. I think you've made a very good introduction that is also very educative to us and to me in particular. But first is to say, in many times when you look at the church or faith-based organizations, you many times look at it only in terms of the operation of evangelization or faith care that they give to their faithful. But there is also a legal kind of structure which underpins all the organizational aspects of those faith-based organizations. So the example, the Catholic Church, first, in terms of organization, you have in each diocese, which is a legal entity on itself, and it has finality in decisions, be they economical, financial, or otherwise. But there is also, you may call it a federation, where these individual dioceses come together, and in a nation or in a particular jurisdiction, they then act as one body, and that is what is called a conference of bishops. In various churches, there are similar organizations. Again, this is a juridical person capable to transact and also capable to own property. So in the point alluded here, you have a lot of property that is owned, for example, land, we're speaking about land here, owned by the specific dioceses. It is owned under trusteeship. So although the head of a diocese is a bishop in terms of he's both the CEO, but more than a CEO, he has a little more of decision power, or the power to make decisions, a little more than reporting to a board he does have. But he has advisory governance structures that assist him in both administration and in reaching those decisions. However, he does not have the power to alienate land or do things which would otherwise put the institution in a situation of perhaps risk. So in this case, the trusteeship, which is made up of several trustees in each diocese, and at the same time in the federation of dioceses, which we call the conference, which is the body within a jurisdiction, when they also make decisions, they have the trusteeship of that body that is the one who are the legal holder in terms of legislation, civil legislation. So there is a distinction between what may come as an internal organization and then face in the law what you may call the legal entities and the juridical entities, which are the ones which here for a concern here financially you want to engage with. In these various, I'm going very quickly, in each one of the entities in the faith-based organizations, in this case the Catholic Church, be it be at the lower level, which is the diocese, as I said, it is on itself independent or autonomous, or at the higher level where several dioceses are together in order to carry out whatever project or program that they wish, which we do. At both these levels, there is a committee that is instituted in the Catholic Church by internal law that is called a financial committee, that is a financial board, to which the bishop is bound first to listen and to get their consent, especially in issues financial. And it is this board that, should anyone want to engage with the faith-based organization, you will have to interact in order to reach a good resolution and a good agreement in those terms. So that more or less presents a little bit of organizational. At the same time, in the Catholic Church, the persons making these decisions at these financial committee levels are not just clerics, knowing that we, men of cloth, are not necessarily experts in finances, and just like in any corporate organizations, these committees are the persons who are within those boards are persons who are outstanding in financial matters, in matters of development, in other matters, who will be therefore advising and even interacting with whoever may be the partner who wants to enter into a relationship with the church at that level. So that, in a few brushstrokes, explains the organizational, both civil and juridical. At that stage also, it's good to mention, as you already mentioned, Arman, that the reason for faith-based organizations entering into partnership for development and property is because of the mission which we want finally to service. It is true for long, almost all faith-based organizations, we've depended on assistance from outside. So the idea of sustainability is something that all these organizations are thinking about. Sustainability in the welfare, especially programs, and also on programs which will further the faith mission that those institutions have. And as time has gone and progressed, this external assistance has gone reducing. And so there is need to engage in ways in which, for example, the support of hospitals, the support of education can actually be funded in a consistent and sustainable manner. So if you think the health institutions, today we were just attending the roundtable on health, and it is clear that in terms of improving hospitals, we need to inject money, and sometimes we don't have that money to be injected. So you need sources in order to improve, in order to give that service at a reasonable rate to the common folk, especially the low underprivileged persons. So in this context then, the idea is to seek partnerships that will develop what we have, and with this be able to re-inject this amount of money, and that is the driving and the major consideration these faith-based organizations will be looking at. Will I have financial returns soon and gradually increasing, so that in fact I can continue with my mission without having headaches? And so that's where we come in now to look. And the biggest asset, as you have said, I take for example in Kenya, the Catholic Church alone may own well over 150,000 acres altogether, maybe 200,000, I'm not sure. Of course, these are all given with the idea of furthering the main missions of the church. So we are not going to use that for other ends, but to be able to reinject it for the welfare of the people. But that is a big asset, and with this asset, we want to enter into partnership with financiers who are willing to come with us in order to develop a sustainable financial investment that will be both beneficial for us, with this main concern at the end, the soonest possible, and without losing what we were saying, the ownership of the land, or that it reverts to us, an agreement which is a SVP, which eventually will revert through a concessional agreement or arrangement. So in a nutshell, I think that maybe answers and puts into context the whole idea of this financing. And we have several examples, but I think that pretty much sums up the organizational and expectation.
Okay, thank you, Your Grace. I'll circle back to you, but I just quickly want to just ask Luke a question. You've also had experience working with faith-based organizations, both Christian and Muslim. I want you to just basically just share with us your experiences, number one, and number two, you've also been involved in mitigating and bringing down project costs through some innovative interventions in terms of projects and how it's financed and how it's structured to sort of bring the cost of projects down. So perhaps you can give us some insight on that and your experience with Questworks and ASCube in Kenya and in East Africa.
Thank you very much, Norman. Okay, we have worked in East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, and we have had some projects in Zambia. But what really led to the formation of our company is we were part of a building and estates department of a university in Nairobi. And around the time of the credit crunch, we went to tender we came up with, the tenders came back and they were almost double what we anticipated, and it was not the mistake of the QS, it's just that there was election risk and a credit crunch, and it was a complicated building. So we had to do something, and through a series of meetings of value engineering and assembling an internal team to do all the construction and the procurement and the supervision, we managed to shave the costs by 50%. There were a lot of advantages in working as an in-house team in a university at that time. One of them was the laws on our side. We could get VAT exemptions. We could do a lot of tax planning. We could cut costs by efficient use of labor, and something that at that time was difficult in the Kenyan market, we introduced plant and machinery. So I remember we were trying to get the main contractor to come up with a batching plant and a concrete pump. And his answer was simply, and this is a Class A contractor, had 20 years of experience, he said, it cannot be done in Kenya. We don't use additives in concrete. We don't use super plasticizers. Those are foreign things. And there is no concrete pump in Kenya that works. So to try and get them over to our side and explain to them and finance the buying of a new concrete plant, batching and the pump and the mixing, and well, helping them with all the expertise and mixing the super plasticizers and everything, we managed to reduce the costs and deliver the project, a bit later than on time, because there were other quality issues. There were demolitions that had to be done because of theft on site. But we managed to do that. And with that, that's when we decided to form our own company, which is like a one-stop shop for construction. So we have architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, and then we have international procurement. We've delivered material from China to Turkey, from Italy to Kenya, from Malaysia to Puerto Rico. And we're still doing this for other clients. So with that, we've managed to cut costs in many areas. We implemented it again in another project in Uganda, where we brought the cost down significantly. As you know, the costs in Uganda for construction it's Kenya plus a factor, because most of them come either from Kenya or through Kenya. Uganda is a landlocked country. They are a bit behind us in terms of technology, but they're always catching up. They're like a step behind, but they're always catching up. So to help them to get materials in cheaply was a very big help for them. Secondly, to bring all the things that we taught the contractors in Kenya, to take them to Uganda also helped a lot. So with that, that's how we got in touch with helping faith-based organizations to reduce their costs, because that's one of the biggest things that they have. They have relied for so many years on well-wishers, and you can't go back and ask well-wishers that, look, project costs have escalated, we need a bit more money. They'll think that this is just a bunch of people who don't understand construction. So with that, that's how we managed to get into partnerships with faith-based organizations. I don't know whether I answered all the questions.
Thanks, Luke. Archbishop, Your Grace, you are for over 7 years the chair of the finance committee of the church, which basically oversees several $1 billion worth of assets, and you are primarily responsible for that. How did you use to source your capital for your projects? That's number one. And secondly, what are the unique challenges that you faced being a faith-based organization in terms of trying to source capital and get capital in for the opportunities that you saw fit?
Thank you. For a long time, the tradition in faith-based organizations have been going to look for willing donors. And this, for all, whichever faith-based organization, the idea was get your briefcase, go to Europe, just go around shopping. And unfortunately, just imagine a few years ago when there was a crunch of Europe, you went out there, no one even opened the door for you because they even was struggling to survive. So basically, that is a lot of financing that up to perhaps 15 years ago was done through similar-minded faith-based organization or faith-based financiers. this. For example, there is a bank in Germany that is basically faith-based. They were willing to consider and perhaps give you a soft loan, but always in foreign currency. There are other people who are willing to give you assistance of sister churches, you may say. So that a lot of that was what we were capitalizing. But to be honest, you cannot be able to do a huge project that is significantly going to be a source of your financing with such low incomes from those kind of donations. So we had then to go back to the drawing board, and that is when we broke the taboo, if you may say. As already you explained, amongst a faith-based organization, very averse to borrowing. Experience has been pretty bad because perhaps we haven't been very good managers at the beginning, and so we may have lost property because we really defaulted somewhere along the line. So there's a lot of fear, there was a lot of fear about debt financing. And so we had to go back and to start saying, okay, let's get into debt financing, let's start borrowing money. And with the banks, until perhaps 2-3 years ago, in fact, maybe 2 years ago, they were willing to, they talk you well, but the rates, the borrowing rates were just prohibitive. And very soon we found ourselves in very difficult waters, especially in terms of making this project really come out from just paying the debt to bringing in income. So that's what we have gone through. There has been, then we've said we have a lot of land, let's see whether we can find partners. And in Kenya, we've had one of the partners. We are also right now in negotiations, but it started a long time ago, which is in green energy. We have a big land. Can we go into solar energy? So we are thinking about putting a solar energy farm of about 200 acres. Now, that's quite significant. Now, that's the kind of negotiations that we started opening when we started now bringing in persons of finance to advise us also. And we are now into looking into bigger investment. Right now in Kenya, we are doing 350 Kenya shillings million. That will be about $3 million mall that we are now constructing, hoping that it is going to come back to give finances. And that, again, we've done it now through debt financing. At first, we were in equity financing, and we thought we had a good equity fund partner. But again, because the church, perhaps we didn't seem very familiar with finances. We have these people who give us a very rosy story, and only when you go and ask advice and you sit down and you realize that really they're just taking advantage. So we've had a lot of very unreliable partners who've come in and seen the kill because we have undervalued our land and wanted to make a lot more from it. And so that's one of the problems that we have, ethical persons who can be believed when they come in as partners. And we've also had problems about where the money is coming from. There are those who want to give us funds, but their source of funds are dubious. And as church, we can afford to have that. I mean, the ethical funding is very, very important for us, that they are not involved in funding or operations that are unethical, that do not meet the threshold of our ethical demands. So we have progressed, and now at this moment, and that is what this discussion comes in, and I'm very interested, is that we would want to do more. We would like, it's not just about having more income, is that it will propel a lot of our welfare activities in a meaningful way, both in education. For example, the hostels for students, university students in Nairobi, whereby these young fellows are staying in places that lend themselves to not so a good, upright and moral atmosphere. You want to give them a place where you can give some kind of formative and protective, you may use that term, environment of hostels. That's important for us as church. We'd like to do great things like that. We have huge number of students who need sponsorship. Before we were doing that buy back assistance, but how we should have a fund that is an endowment fund built from incomes so that we can be able to increase the number of students who are from poor families, be they persons who have, for example, we are supporting very many who are HIV family orphans, and they need that assistance. And though it is a government issue, we as church feel it is a first concern. Our health institutions in Kenya, the church operates over 40%, faith-based organizations over 45%, and the Catholic Church 30% of the health facilities in Kenya. If we can uplift the standards, but how do you uplift them unless you have finances to inject? So these are the kind of things that we are looking bigger, looking further. Every time we have a calamity or a famine, we all have to go and ask for money from outside in order to mitigate it with our people. How can we, is there no way that we as church can also have funds that we can carry out these works of charity? So that is the kitty we are trying to build. So now we are thinking for bigger things, but up to maybe, as I said, 10 years ago, we were working with very little assistance, and perhaps we were not aware as much the value of the assets that we have in land. And now we are trying to do that. The church also, finally, has gotten into other initiatives. In Kenya, for example, we've started a finance and insurance company. And we kind of plowed our resources and we started an insurance company so that we don't have to give that money to other people, so that it helps us at the same time. And this insurance company is growing and it's giving a bit of dividends back to us. So we are looking at things. In Uganda, they started a bank. It's also doing pretty well, and it's also giving dividends. So we are looking at ways which are sustainable, but those are still small. If we can go into more property and to more development and to more sustainable income lines, then we are certain that we can do a lot more on the welfare line.
Okay, thank you very much. You say small, but if I understand correctly, is it a Crane Microfinance Bank? Huh? I think it's the largest bank in Uganda. Yeah, Centenary, not Crane. Centenary Bank, Microfinance Bank. I think it's the largest in Uganda, so small is relative. Okay, so I think at this point, I'll just open up to the floor for any questions, and then we can take it from there. Yes, please.
My name's Greg Skeen from G5 Properties. We've had some limited, we're a property development company that's based in Johannesburg, and we move into various African countries, east and west. We've had some experience in one project in Botswana where we partnered with the Young Women's Christian Association, YWCA. And I think in this situation, it's a much smaller organization, and they do have pieces of land. But I think quite relevant to property development is that the land has to be in the right place. So, they have strategic pieces of land which suit that, but they also have other pieces of land that are in rural areas which would be very, very difficult to develop into anything profitable. So that's one challenge. The other challenge we found is because they're a small organization focused on benefiting young women through things like education and shelter, they don't have the skills to interact on a commercial basis. So a lot of it is about either us trying to educate or them getting consultants, external consultants at a certain cost. For example, legal, or someone to check the finances to make sure that we're not taking them for a ride. Now, obviously, we're going in good faith, but it's very difficult, I think, in their position for them to really take what they see at face value, because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that would be charlatans or would be trying to, take advantage. So I think that's a big challenge for a small faith-based organization is they can bring their land to the table, but their skill set doesn't always match up. And then the other thing I just wanted to comment on was that it sounds like if the land in the Catholic Church in Kenya is theirs in perpetuity, it's very difficult, for example, for a bank to take a lien over that land or to have any sort of security over a development. So that to me would be a challenge. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Your Grace.
Thank you. I think you're right about the fact of strategic land. It's not enough to have land. It has to be strategically situated. And I do think that that's part of the mapping that many times you as a financier would want to map and see which land will be useful and which side is development going, and so that you see. So the value of land is different, and that is why even the valuing of that land would depend largely on its location. Thanks be to God, most of, and now I'm speaking about church, maybe at the level of the diocese, will have land fairly strategically placed within the towns. Maybe a diocese, a rural diocese, may not have land in the main city, but it will have land at another place, and it might be possible at times even to do some kind of, those dioceses may be able to do some exchanges of things that the development can take place in a place where it is going to bring better returns. So I think it's true. The second thing, the challenge of expertise is real. It's not only real with the small FBOs, it is also real with the big, even dioceses. And that is one of the things during my chairmanship of the finance committee in the 10 years, we put a lot of effort in organizing financial committee or workshops for persons who are running this financial, who are taking care of the finances of all these organizations. We've had very many partners who have helped us out in that, including Corat Africa and other even business-based organizations in Kenya who are willing, because they know they can see it will be useful when we engage, that they have someone there. The third thing we're doing there is governance structures. And in these governance structures, which is basically to have a competent and qualified board, who are the ones who are working in the finances. And I think for anyone willing to engage with FBOs, that's one question you have to ask. Do you have a board that is competent to discuss with us? You speak with me alone, I'm not a financier, it's not good enough because I won't look after that project. You need an interlocutor who are of the same, and that you also help us if you demand it. It is there, is required, but at times you don't have it. In this kind of small organizations, what we do is to have 3 persons, or you ask them to have 3 persons, an ad hoc committee for that project that you as an investor also wishes that they have the qualifications that they need. That way you are sure that it has been well run on the other side, and you're also sure that you have someone who you can actually raise the issues and become an interlocutor. So I think that is that's the second thing that about the small. The third one, I've forgotten the question. Yes, the land, generally it's on, a lot of the land is freehold, and then there is also 99-year leasehold, but renewable always. I think this land, the property is usable as collateral in the banks, it's no problem. It's not that the church keeps it under lock and key and cannot go out, it can be used, but the idea is the church in principle would not wish to alienate that land. That is a basic principle. Does church alienate land? Does it sell land? Yes, it does, through a certain process that has also been clearly established. So when there is a default, can that land be sold? Yes, the answer is yes, but that is a crisis situation. But in principle, the arrangement about financing and development should take into account that we do not wish to get rid of this land. This is an asset that we want to maintain in perpetuity as an entry principle. Now, other things is when things don't go well, and there is that leeway about alienating and even using that as collateral. So it's not an issue about not having a safety net. Yes.
On the issue of strategic land, in one of the East African countries, when the missionaries came, the communities gave them land on the hills because they believed that's where the spirits were. But then 100 years later, that's the most strategic land and the most valuable land. So it depends, really.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just wanted to add, yes, and then we'll go to that question. I just wanted to add that, just to respond to your query, is that the way around that is that the church can also issue, faith-based, not just the church, even the Muslim entities, can issue you the long-term lease for a significant amount of time, which then serves primarily the same purpose, because then you're able to make your revenue, see your yields through, and then exit. or revert the land back to them at some point in future time. So that's possibly another way that you can deal with that particular challenge. Okay, on to the last question, because I understand I'm pressed for time.
Thank you. My name is Reverend George Amaku, Ghana, bro. My contribution is that the church's ability to assemble land over the past period, especially even in Ghana, the Catholic Church is also a significant landowner, has helped the church to be able to do so many things without now having to cough up money to buy land in very strategic areas. And I think it is something that the rest of us in other faith-based organizations should also imbibe. Because, for instance, when you go to the regional capitals, the Catholic Church would acquire land sometimes on the outskirts of the town when land is very cheap and buy vast acres. And these lands will be kept. And the city will grow and it will go around it. So before you realize, it is in the center of town. So I think that long-term strategic thinking has helped the church acquire these lands. So I'm very happy Archbishop and his team are working using this asset to help propagate the ideals for which the church was set up. Thank you very much.
Just to say that, thank you very much for those comments. I think it's part of what maybe, much as they were not financiers, they had a strategy. But the comfort, and this is something that the ideals, and it is good, especially the social ideals. So in this kind of investment, whoever comes to invest with a faith-based organization must also see the social side of what you're doing, not just the business side. You get the business, you get your returns, but there's a lot of the returns that most of this, much as it at face value, a mall that is set up by the church might seem, oh, what a thing. But you have to see what is that income stream going to do, the social impact that changes around. And if you look historically in the history of the last maybe 12 centuries, you will see that it is more or less the same that happened in Europe, that what the churches actually were able to turn around was thanks to what they had accumulated in terms of land and in terms of other incomes that they did. Along the line, some of them messed up, and it's true, corruption also came in, which is, thanks be to God, in the church is less, but I wouldn't put my hand in the fire and say that it doesn't exist. So it's good also that we have that caveat too.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, final, okay, fine. I'm on extra time, but anyway, Hasham, maybe.
I'll make it very quick.
Yeah.
Hasham from PDM. PDM is an affiliate organization with the Gherkin Development Network. And our model is we never ever sell land, the social organization. There is PDM, AKDN has two arms, one for profit and one for other. Economic development is for profit. Social development is non-for-profit. So social development land, we never ever allowed to sell. So what we do is that we take the portfolio of the social development network, and like the gentleman said, that you have acquired land long time back. The important thing is that there are properties which are suboptimal. What you need to do is optimize the property. You get a developer and enter into build, operate, transfer. So what they do is they build, they operate, they take a long-term lease, and when they take a long-term lease, of course, there is a development cost that has to be paid, and after the development cost, we enter into LJV, which is long lease, joint venture, that is you share the free cash flows. And during that lease period, it's a win-win situation for the developer, but you will retain your land, and there will be a residual terminal value for your land.
Fantastic. I think the Aga Khan Development Network has done a lot of work across the whole world. Their body of work is quite well known. You have the Serena hotels, you have several, there's a lot of Aga Khan hospitals, a lot of Aga Khan schools, secondary, primary, and etc. So I think that brings us to a close. Thank you very much for your time. What I just want to encourage you to do is that His Grace and Luke are around tomorrow as well, at least for half of the day. We may not have been able to cover a lot of things that you may want to discuss with them, but please take advantage of them being here right now, and you can continue this conversation. I think the take-homes, hopefully from this particular plenary, is that, number one, there's different interventions that you can approach, you can undertake over and above, beyond the conventional interventions that we adopt. But number two, that even with the faith-based organizations, the challenges that a lot of the developers have faced going up continent is how do we get access to these strategic parcels of land, and how do we unlock the value in these parcels of land, because they're so tightly held by these organizations, be it government, state-owned entities, or in this case, faith-based organizations. So this just gives you pause to think about how you can engage and how you can actually realize a project regardless of some of these challenges that have historically existed. Some of them are now ready and willing to engage and look at it from a business perspective. So I would encourage you to just basically run with that and make the most of it. Thank you very much. Have a great day.